everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Jacob. And we got a good episode lined up for you this week, which I always say that, but it's true. But, anyways, before we get started today, I want to do a few podcast plugs. Talk about our social media. If you want to check us out on Facebook, it's facebook.com/conversations with Jacob on YT. Twitter is CWJ Podcast. Our podcasting platforms include iHeartRadio, Amazon, and we're on YouTube, Pandora, 20 different sites by now. Our website, Conversations with Jacob, podcast.weebly.com. You can check out upcoming guests, past guests, and a little section on there called Post from the Host. Joining me today is John Roberts. If you don't know who John Roberts is, let me tell you a little bit about him. And he's appeared on the NASCAR Race Hub, NASCAR Live, NASCAR Race Day presented by Home Depot, NASCAR Victory Lane, NASCAR on Speed, NASCAR on Fox, and he's got a show. He's got a radio show with Chocolate Myers called Trade and Paint. John, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Glad to be here, brother.
Oh, absolutely. Now, for people that's listening, and how did you get started in the broadcasting business?
Well, it's actually kind of a funny story. I was in college, and I was working at a radio station, and I think you could shout farther than the signal went. And there was a guy I ran into one night, and his name was Chris Jones. I remember that, Chris Jones. And he was the operations manager at this tiny little TV station in my college town. And I said, hey, I really want to work in the TV business. Do you have any job openings this summer? And I thought, maybe I could write copy, rip scripts, edit videotape, something like that. But he said, got one job open this summer, and I don't think you're going to like it, but it's part-time gardener. So I took it. I took the job as part-time gardener, and I stayed in summer school, and I rode my 10-speed. I had a Schwinn 10-speed, and I rode it 10 miles a day to the TV station, and I worked on the outside gardens. I changed concrete. I planted plants. I mowed the grass, and after a summer of doing that, I met enough people walking in and out of the building that I got a little internship. And then I got an internship in the newsroom, and I was working as a part-time reporter. So I was mostly off air, but some on air. And what happened, it was funny. No one wanted to anchor on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And the guys were fighting back and forth that no one wanted to do it. And so I said, let me do it. I'll do it. And the news director said, no way, the college kid, the gardener, can do this. And he didn't want to let me do it. And when push came to shove, these other two guys would not work Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. And it was either he was going to do it, the news director, or I was. So he gave me a shot at Christmas Eve. I anchored the news on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And then both of the guys, they didn't want to work on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day either. So I did that. On January 2nd, I got a full-time job as news anchor at the station.
Oh, wow. Now, and how did you kind of transition from that to NASCAR?
Well, I took a strange trip around the Southeast, and I always really wanted to do sports because honestly, if you're in the TV news business, when you're doing news, you see people on the worst day of their lives. When you're doing sports, you see people on the best day of their lives. It's a lot better. And so I finally got my first sports job in Richmond, Virginia. I did a lot of news to get there, and I got a full-time sports job in Richmond, Virginia, and then took a strange trip around the Southeast, ended up in Charlotte, North Carolina. And when I got to Charlotte, the guy who hired me said, are you okay with doing our NASCAR coverage? The guy you're replacing has done our NASCAR for years. And I said, I've been to several races. I'm very interested. And if you're working in Charlotte, North Carolina, what else do you want to do but NASCAR? So I said, I embraced it. So it's interesting, Jacob. My experience before that was mostly with NFL and NBA teams. Those people have guaranteed contracts and they don't really like media around. NASCAR is a whole different beast. NASCAR, your image is important as a NASCAR driver. Exposure is important for your sponsor. So I called and I thought, my boss at the time, Paul Cameron was his name. Wonderful guy, great guy. And I say he's a great guy because he hired me. I said the only mistake you've ever made in your career, dude, was hiring me. But he said, "Hey, look, call this guy. If you're going to do our motorsport stuff, just call this guy and go talk to him." Well, it was Jimmy Johnson at Hendrick Motorsports, but not the driver, Jimmy
Oh
Johnson,
yeah.
the general manager, Jimmy Johnson. At this point, Jimmy Johnson was racing motorcycles in Southern California. And so I called this fella up and I thought to myself, after working with the NBA and the NFL, I said, I can't call this guy. He's not going to talk to me. I can't, you have to go through PR and all this crap. Dude, I called him and I got through to his office. And I said, and I was a little bit shocked. I said, "Hey man, I'm taking over motorsports coverage. I want to do it right. Can I come talk to you sometime?" And he goes, "What are you doing right now?" And I said, "I hope coming to see you." And so I went up there and I went to see Jimmy Johnson at Hendrick Motorsports. Now he's no longer with us, unfortunately. He passed away. Uh, but Jacob, those guys that day, I went up to Hendrick Motorsports and they had just won the championship. They just won their second championship with Jeff Gordon. You wouldn't think that they would have time to entertain somebody who is just a dumb local TV sports reporter. And so Jimmy Johnson took me in, talked to me for an hour, took me down to a guy named Randy Dorton, head engine builder. Talked to Randy Dorton for an hour. Randy took me down to a fellow by the name of Ray Evernham, who gave me more than an hour of time and was as welcoming, as humble, as informative. And then went walking around a little bit with Ray. Well, Ray dropped me off in their little exercise facility where John and Ricky Hendrick were exercising. They were working out. Well, they stopped and they talked to me for forever. And I think I spent 4 hours that day at Hendrick Motorsports. And so if anybody ever says, "Man, you're a little bit biased towards Hendrick Motorsports," well, they were the first people to give me the time of day. They were as nice as they could be. And I will just absolutely never forget that. And I thought at that point, I thought, man, I don't really want to mess with the other sports anymore. I like these guys. I like NASCAR.
Now, when you was on the NFL, did you ever cover any Super Bowls?
I went to 4 Super Bowls, covered 4 Super Bowls in my time. And, Jacob, the funny thing about a Super Bowl, and I was very fortunate to go. The first Super Bowl I went to, I grew up in Washington, D.C. And if the Redskins lost on a Sunday afternoon at my dinner table growing up, we didn't talk much. We were Redskins fans, and just coincidentally, Joe Gibbs was the man back then, and we lived fairly close. As the crow flies, I probably grew up about 5 miles from Joe Gibbs and Coy and JD, and with the Bethards and the Pettibones were actually in our neighborhood, the old guard Washington Redskins. And so my first Super Bowl I went to, it was Super Bowl 26. And again, if you look at that, you know how old I am. It was Super Bowl 26, and the Skins beat the Buffalo Bills 37-14. I was at 34-17. Ernest Biner scored the first touchdown. Art Monk scored the last touchdown. And Timmy Smith had 273 all-purpose yards, which still is a record. But after that, and the funny thing about it is that a Super Bowl is more about the hype around it than the actual game, I feel. When you go to the Daytona 500, the hype and the pageantry around it is good, but I feel it's still more about the race. I feel it's still more about the event. And the Super Bowl, the hype around it. But what I always tell people, Jacob, is when you go to a Super Bowl, the entire world of the NFL converges on that city and that event and that venue. When you go to a NASCAR race, the entire world of NASCAR converges on that city every week. 36 weekends out of the year, you have a mini Super Bowl in a certain community. And I feel as if it's interesting that the hype that goes around the Super Bowl, it's very cool. It's nice to be around, but oftentimes Super Bowl games are not very compelling. They can be very one-sided. And out of the three, the four that I went to, three were absolutely goat games. They weren't even close.
So, do you think that the Super Bowl and the Daytona 500 kind of gets, kind of has like the same energy to it?
Oh, very much so. Pageantry, energy, what it's all about. And I still, to this day, Jacob, I'm going to find somebody in the NFL. I'm going to find an NFL player in an interview. I'm going to find them and I'm going to get them to say, when they have the interview, they say, well, this is our Daytona 500, right? Because everybody in NASCAR says this is our Super Bowl. I want a guy in the Super Bowl to say this is our Daytona 500. This is very important, but it's big. But the pageantry of a big event is very huge. It's really cool to be around, and I was very fortunate again to go to all those Super Bowls. But from 1992 to shoot, again, I hate to date myself so much, but I guess people can figure it out by now. From 1992 to 2019, I only missed one Daytona 500. I was only not at one Daytona 500, and it was 2001.
Oh
And I'm kind
wow!
of glad I wasn't there.
Now, of course, we'll get to that in a minute. But I want to confirm something with you, and you can say I'm wrong or I'm right, which is okay to be wrong in my own show. So you hosted the first show on Speed, and you also hosted the last show, right?
Yep. Yeah, coincidentally, yes. The first show on Speed was out of a place called the Inspiration Network in Charlotte. And it's funny the way it came down. They were a little bit behind the ball. We had worked for Fox Sports Net for a year, and they were behind the eight ball. They had to do all this programming, and when it came time to do the programming, they had when Speed TV, when Speed Channel launched, there were still on that day, on that Monday, there were still dudes bolting cubicles together and there were fax machines on the floor. Fox really wasn't ready for that. And I'm really happy that they weren't ready for that, because I happened to be a warm body standing in the studio. And they said, "Hey, man, you got a pulse?" And I said, "Yes, I got a pulse." So, well, okay, you're hosting, you're hosting one of these shows, because they're behind the eight ball. But then as it grew, and Speed Channel just took root. It was really an exciting. Well, it was, I guess, with Speed Channel, it was about 12 years, 10 on the road, 10 traveling to every race. But there were those things. So myself and Daryl Waltrip, we're at Michigan, and it was a very much talked about transition from Speed Channel to FS1. And it just so happened that there was it was a Friday. I think it was Friday afternoon. Myself and a couple other reporters did a NASCAR live show. They stopped at that point, did some taped programming, and then Saturday morning, more taped programming. But myself and Daryl Waltrip did a NASCAR live show that was 9:10 in the morning. And we went from all red, there was all red stuff behind us on Speed Channel, to all blue. Now it's blue, Fox Sports One. And so that was a really big honor to be able to do that. I actually, it's kind of cool right now. As the crow flies, I'm only a few miles away from Daryl's house here in Nashville, Tennessee. Daryl's in Franklin, I'm in Nashville, and we're very close, and we still keep in touch pretty good. But that was a really cool thing to be part of. And Speed Channel was really cool. When we started it, we didn't know what we had. We were just a bunch of guys trying to do good TV, and it took such root. There were such gearheads and such motorsports enthusiasts, and the way we started Speed Channel, and I gotta say, uh, there was one dude, and his name was Rick Miner, and Rick Miner was our vice president of programming at Speed Channel. And if you give anybody credit for what Speed Channel was, for the no nonsense nature of it, and for everybody that worked on it, Jacob, no one cared who got the credit. We just wanted to get the shows on the air, and we wanted to get the information out there. And it was guys the likes of Steve Burns, Lee Diffie, Bob Varsha, Randy Pemberton was with us for a while, and everybody was out there to get the information out, not to worry about who got the credit.
Now, and how did you feel when Speed transitioned of, and how did you feel when Speed transferred over to Fox Sports?
Well, I understood what they were saying. What they wanted to do is Fox Sports One, they wanted to take on ESPN. They wanted to have a 24-hour competition sports network. But the problem was they were taking on a very large, they were taking on two entities to make this. Okay. Yes, they were going up against ESPN, right? With about 85 million households at the time. On Speed Channel, we had 85 million households. ESPN had 120 million. So you're going up against a large thing. But what they were also going up against was alienating the motorhead of the world. They were alienating the viewers that love Speed Channel. It was really funny. I got to tell you a funny story. I grew up in DC, and it was about the third year of Speed Channel, and I went up there to see some of my buddies, and we went to an old place in Georgetown that we used to hang out, and we're standing there in Georgetown, and this lady comes up to me, and she looks me in the eye, and she says, "I hate you." And I said, "Ma'am, I don't think you know me." And she goes, "I know you and I hate you." And I said, "Okay, could you explain to me why you hate me?" And she goes, "You stole my husband." And I said, "Okay, I really don't like where this conversation is going." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she goes, "Ever since you guys started Speed Channel, my husband doesn't talk to me anymore." And she said, "He's such a gearhead. He loved the F1. He loved the World Rally." And that was another thing about that, Jacob. The thing about Speed Channel, it was very heavily NASCAR based, but we had Speed Report that covered all forms of motorsports. We had World Rally. I got to do two World Rally races. F1 never got to do an F1 race. We had F1. Bob Varsha, Steve Matchett, and David Hobbs, just to have those three guys in our building with us. Lee Diffie, to have those guys around. Man, Bob Jenkins. The list goes on and on and on of the people that were involved with Speed Channel, the best in the motorsports business. And again, I was just in awe to be there. I was very happy to be there. I was happy to be getting paid for man, not breaking any fingernails. We weren't struggling. We were on the air a long time, and we had no scripts, no teleprompters, none of that. It was the greatest experience of my life in terms of professional television, hands down.
Now, did you ever have any problems with any coworkers or, you know?
No, no. Honestly, no. Now I gotta think though. Okay, all right. This is okay. I do have to say one thing. You remember our good friend Wendy Venturini?
Yeah.
Okay. Wendy Venturini was a young lady and she had no experience producing, but they threw her to the wolves on Victory Lane back when we did Victory Lane from the studio. And I love Wendy to death. She jumped in there and for about, I think that'll be 3 months or so, Wendy figured out how to produce the show. She asked me what I needed, and I asked her what she needed together. So we figured out how to do this show. Man, it was at the end of the race, and I loved it. At the end of the race, we came on the air, and we had to fill time until the interviews got recorded and got there. We had to fly by the seat of our pants. No scripts. There was no time to write a script. There was no time to figure out what was it. And me and Wendy got along so wonderfully well. a gentleman by the name of Chris Long took over as a manager, and Chris Long, again, another fantastic manager. I love the guy. Well, he looked at Wendy and said, Wendy, you need to be on the air. You don't need to be producing. You need to be in front of the camera, not behind the camera. So I thought, well, I'm very glad for Wendy, but she's a linchpin in this thing. So just so I'm not mean about it, when Wendy went to do the trucks, Wendy went to be a pit reporter for the trucks and was knocking out of the park, was doing great. Well, the fella that they hired from ESPN to produce our show, to produce Victory Lane, I don't know where they found him, Jacob. He could not produce a urine sample. He could not produce anything. He was absolutely 100% incompetent. And I pitched a fit. It is my one time. Okay, I've been on the air 36 years. 36 years. One time I pitched an anchor fit, and I went off on this guy. I went, man, you cannot throw. We got 1 million people watching this show, and you're throwing me to the wolves every segment. You don't know what you want. You don't know what you want to do. And so my friend Rick Miner called me up Monday morning, the big boss, And so it was funny. I was, the corporate America, I didn't know in that age, I call people and say, hey, Jacob, it's John. In that situation, it was his secretary. Hey, this is Rick's secretary. Rick's on the line for you. I said, oh, okay. So because it's Rick had a real gruff voice. I said, Roberts, well, what's wrong? I said, what do you mean what's wrong? He said, in 10 years, we've never been able to piss you off, but you're mad. If you're mad, there's something wrong. So I said, Rick, somebody finally got, he said, I've never known you to be mad. I've never known you to be, if you're mad, something's wrong. And so I said, dude, I don't want to get a guy in trouble. I don't want to, but the show is not going well. It's not up to our standards. And so Rick popped in 9:00 the next Sunday night, surprises everybody, pulls in and goes into the control room and starts watching this person whose name I will not say try to produce a show. And again, he could not produce anything. And he's trying to produce the show. And so after we got through the show, Rick came walking in the studio and he said, I will never do that to you again. I'm sorry. And the next weekend we had a new producer. Yeah, so I did. Yeah, one time. 36 years, one.
Now, and what is your memories of Dale Earnhardt?
Oh man, I tell you what, the old man was cool. He was just cool. And one time, oh boy, I hate to admit, because it was before the Speed Channel days. It was she was probably 94, 95, and we're down at Daytona, and we're in the garage area, and Dale was there. And Dale was bigger than life. This guy was absolutely bigger than life. But if you got a chance to talk to him, you found out that this guy who's bigger than life is actually the most regular dude you would ever hope to meet in your life. And so one time he was messing with us. I was trying to interview him. I was trying to ask him some questions, and he was taking his Sharpie that he had, and he was faking like he was writing on the lens of our camera. And I was getting a little frustrated, and there was a guy named oh man, Jacob, I usually remember Ed Hinton from the Daytona paper. And I was kind of mad about it at the time, and he said, look, dude, he said, if Earnhardt messes with you, if he jokes with you, it means he likes you. And so there were a couple times after that. The thing about Earnhardt that people didn't get at the time, he was mobbed everywhere he went, and he felt uncomfortable with that. He didn't really like it. He wanted to drive the race car, but he knew that if you're in that limelight, you do have these sort of things that come with it. But he didn't really like it. But if you were off the beaten path, if there wasn't a horde of people around, and you start talking to Dale Earnhardt, it was really, really amazing how he was your best friend. He was the guy you'd go hunting, fishing with. And I don't even hunt or fish, but I would do I would do it with him. And absolutely the most regular guy. Here's a dude that dropped out of 8th grade. The day he died, his empire was grossing $120 million a year. Here's a guy who knew what the hell he was doing. He had street smarts and everything. And so when they, when they said, and we got this word a little bit early because we were employed by Fox at the time, and we are doing only Daytona 500 I've ever missed. The look on Ken Schrader's eyes when they interviewed him, uh, we said something's wrong. Something's majorly wrong. And the president of Fox Sports at the time called us in the studio and said, "Get ready, guys. We have a big night in front of us. Dale Earnhardt is dead." And so at the same time, you had to balance. We just lost the biggest icon in our sport. And the guy that really, if you look at it, I had a cool job because of Dale Earnhardt. NASCAR was cool because of Dale Earnhardt. What NASCAR is, Dale Earnhardt was the blue collar guy from the mill town in Kannapolis, North Carolina, making his dream. And so we had to buckle down that night and do the programs right. And we knew there was going to be a lot of people watching. And that little NASCAR Victory Lane show that night after Earnhardt passed, I think still is the highest rated cable sports show
Oh, wow.
in Fox Sports history on a cable network. And the next day, we had just left me and Derek Cope did the show. Derek was with me. And we had just left the memorial service, and Derek called me up and he said, "Hey, there was a dude." And again, I usually remember names. But there was a dude that was kind of Teresa Earnhardt's right-hand man. Had the big gray hair, long gray hair. Was always with Teresa. Handled her business stuff. Real good guy. I don't remember his name. But he had called Derek and said, "Hey, Teresa wants you and John to know that she really, really appreciates what you guys did last night, the way you handled that." And that to me was the biggest, I don't know, the affirmation of anything. But simply put, the old man was cool. Dale Earnhardt was cool, and we had cool jobs because of him. And he was arguably, and it's hard to say that anybody was ever a better driver.
Yeah, speaking of Derek Cope, I had him on the podcast back in July. We talked about that 1990 Daytona 500.
Yep. You don't know. Yep.
um, how you get into broadcasting? So with anybody listening, can they get into broadcasting, or do they gotta have like a certain ability?
No, no. I always tell people, look, it doesn't matter. I got so many doors slammed in my face, and I'm sure you have too.
Yeah.
Right? When you want to do something, but the the landscape of television and media has changed so much in the last 10 years. But in the 25 years before that, what the landscape of television was a job would come open, and a news director in a local TV station would get about 150 tapes. And they would look at those tapes, and so many times people told me what I was doing was wrong because I used to, when I first started out, I shot videotape. I shot my own tape. I was a videographer. And so what happened, what my real the thing that really set me apart was I went to a couple really crappy places that I didn't want to work for very, very low dollar. And I knew I kept my eyes on the prize and I muddled through. But what I always had to do was I always had to do my own stuff. I always had to edit the tape. And no one wants to do that, right? Everybody just wants to anchor. You just want to be in front of the camera and talk. And that's not the way this works. and everybody wants to go to New York City or Washington, D.C. It's not the way this works. You have to go to Harrisonburg, Virginia, Savannah, Georgia, Macon, Georgia, Richmond, Virginia, and get the opportunities. So when WBTV in Charlotte was a wonderful, wonderful television show, wonderful local affiliate, and I was working in Spartanburg. And so there was a guy that they were looking at for the job, right? And this is funny. This is the first time that this TV station had an opening in 12 years. There had not been a sports opportunity in 12 years at this TV station. So, because look at it, I mean, Charlotte, North Carolina, you have NASCAR, Panthers, hockey, the Hornets. It's a major, major sports town. So everybody wants to work there. So I was down at the Super Bowl in Miami. It was the Super Bowl. It was the 49ers and the San Diego Chargers and 49ers. It was all California Super Bowl. And so I was sitting there, and there was this nice old lady sitting on a couch, and we're about ready to do our little live shots. It was what they called the cattle call. The CBS News Pass set up a camera, and you pay them a good deal of money, but one after another, you would jump in front of the camera with your microphone. You put your little microphone flag on there. So I'm waiting to go, and I'm sitting next to this. He's got to be 80 years old. And I said, "Do you mind if I sit here?" "Man, no, not at all." She goes, "What do you do?" "So I work in Spartanburg." And I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And she goes, "Well, my son is Paul Cameron, and he works for WBTV in Charlotte." And I go, "Ma'am, Charlotte's a city I want to work in someday, and I would love to work there." And I said, "I know your son. I know a lot about your son, and he's one of the best in our business and everything." So Paul Cameron comes walking over to pick up his mom after he did his live shot, and I was second in line. And so this nice little old lady looks at her son and says, "Paul, you need to hire this young man," and points at me. And he goes, "Hey, how's it going?" I said, "Hey, John Roberts. Yeah, it's Paul Cameron." "I know." And he goes, "I'd love to hire you, but we just don't have openings." I said, "Well, no big deal, because it's cool and everything." So when the opening came up at Charlotte, when there was an opening, I heard about it. And so I knew the way, you know the way things work. Everybody's calling him, right? Everybody's calling him. And this is, this is barely, guys, the days of cell phones. We don't have Twitter. We don't have text messaging. We don't have anything. So I know that a local sports anchor is going to do his show, and then he's going to do the morning pre-tape, and he's going to get back in the office about 11:45. He's going to wrap everything up. It's 11:45. I ring the office. Sports, Paul Cameron. I said, "Hey, Paul, I don't want to bug you. It's John Roberts from Spartanburg." And I said, "I know your mother." He goes, "What?" I said, "I know your mother." And he goes, "Okay." So then we talked about that. So he got a laugh about it. And he said, "Hey, tell you what," he said, I saw your resume. I saw your tape, but I got to tell you honestly, we want another dude." And so I said, "Okay, that's cool, man." He said, but don't go too far. Don't go too far." And so this fella, Jeff Gravely from Raleigh, worked with my brother. So I called my brother and I said, "Hey," I said, "your buddy Jeff is, ahead of me for this gig." He said, I'm gonna find out what's going on. I'm gonna find out what's going on. So he calls me the next night, and he goes, "Because my brother calls me Jan instead of John." I said, "Jan." He said, "Jan, Jan." He said, "This guy's nickname was Digger." He said, "Digger ain't taking the job. He's not taking. He's not going to Charlotte. He's staying in Raleigh." He said, "If you're second in line, you better get on that right now." And so 2 days later, 11:45, I called up and I said, "Paul, I don't mean to bother you, brother." And he goes, "Hey, man, I'm glad you called." And so the thing was, I know it took me way too long to get to this. And the question that you asked was, how are you going to get involved in this? How are you going to get your start? Paul said, "Listen, you ain't the best anchor," except he said, "You aren't the best anchor." He didn't say anything. "You aren't the best anchor. You aren't the best reporter. You aren't the best shooter. But if I take your shooting ability, your reporting ability, and your anchoring ability all together, because this is a three-pronged job. You have to do all those three things." He said, "You're the best across the board. Can you come up this week and interview?" And so that's how I got in at Charlotte, because I wasn't afraid to run the camera. I wasn't afraid to shoot. I wasn't afraid to report. Everybody wants to just sit on the desk and act like they're on Sports Center. But are you going to do the legwork? Are you going to do the thing? I love, sometimes you see something on Facebook or a social media platform that reminds you, that really hits home. So there's this cartoon on Facebook the other day, and it says in one line, there's a desk and there's a huge line of people behind the desk, and it says, people who want to make it big. And there's all this long line of people, and there's a desk next to it, and it says, people who want to do what it takes. And there's nobody in line. So you figure out what it wants to take. And man, I tell people, I don't care what you want to be. You want to be the best accountant in the world, you better be ready to do the background work. You better be ready to do the homework and be ready. And there's nothing that should stop you from what you want to do. It just so happened that 25 years ago, the TV business was a little bit rough. I don't know how really it is these days breaking in, because I'm not there. But man, don't ever let anybody tell you you can't do something.
Absolutely. Now,
Oh, shoot, Jacob, I think I lost you, bro. Oh, there you are. Are you back?
Yeah, you're
Okay.
back.
Froze for a second.
It's all right. Now, this podcast goes out, November, but here it's September 29th in real time. Now, and who do you think's going to win the NASCAR championship?
Guys, at the beginning of this year, I'm too cheap to actually wager, but we did. At the beginning of this season, I had 3 candidates for the championship. And it's not like you're, I mean, this doesn't take a Rhodes Scholar to figure this out. But my 3 candidates were, and I called them, 2 of them were my killer bees, William Byron, Kyle Busch, and Kyle Larson. Those were my 3 at the beginning of the season. Now, William Byron has certainly lived up to it. Kyle Busch has had flashes of brilliance, and Kyle Larson is still, no question, in this thing. As we sit right now, you might want to say that William Byron is the favorite. But what we do in NASCAR is when someone wins a race, William Byron won Texas, the next week you hand him the championship, right? So, earlier when Martin Truex won a race, you hand him the championship, right? That's not the way this thing works. But I think I have a lot, as of right now, I have a lot of faith. My faith has still never wavered with William Byron. And I had my killer bees. I had Byron, Busch, Larson, and Bell. And my bees, Larson doesn't really fit in there. I liked Christopher Bell for what they did last year in terms of never giving up. Now they're still they're still well alive in this thing. The sleeper in this thing, I honestly believe, is Chris Buescher. If you look at Chris Buescher's finishes over the last 7 races, look at it where we sit right now. And I know this airs later. So as we sit right now before Talladega, William Byron over the last 7 races has the highest average finish. Who's second? Chris Buescher. Yeah. Average finishes, consistency, gaining points, doing those things. So if I right now would look at who is going to be in the championship 4, I thought it was going to be 2 Kyles, Christopher Bell and William Byron. So now what I really want to do is, because hindsight's always is so easy to look in the rearview mirror. If I could pluck my Kyle Busch pick out and put Christopher Buescher in, I would do that right now. And I said Christopher Buescher because I've been listening to Dale Jr. too much. Chris Buescher with Christopher Bell. But man, we just really don't know what's going to happen coming up here. Talladega, the Roval are really interesting. Martinsville, before you go to Phoenix, is really interesting. And then there's humps. There's no, you might say, it's funny. We talked about last week going into Texas. We said, okay, Texas is the control race, right? In this round, here's a round with Texas, Talladega, and the Roval. And say, okay, well, let's go to Texas because this is where we have control over our destiny. More than half of the championship contenders had major league trouble. Every race is a wild card right now. Every race could have something interesting happen. And so if you really look at it right now, I do think the cream will continue to rise to the top. The big dogs continue to dominate, but there's probably going to be a surprise here or there. Guys, we haven't heard anything from Ross Chastain lately. Where has he been? And you better watch out. He could pop up. Again, if I was a betting guy, okay, if I was a wagerer, but again, I'm too cheap to wager. If I was a wagerer, what I would do this time is I would put the ranch on a Ford victory at Talladega and a Ross Chastain top 10. Ross Chastain, guys, in terms of the odds makers, a top 10, Ross Chastain pays plus money. It's plus 135 right now for Ross Chastain to finish in the top 10 at Talladega. Guys, he's won there before. It's Ross Chastain. So that's what I think things could, we always make fun of our old friend Larry McReynolds said, put it all in a salad bowl. Turn it over. Mix it up, turn it over, salad bowl. And it's going to fall out. So I don't know where it's going to fall out. But, man, this is a fun time of the season. And I'm going to stick with my predictions, but they could be.
Well, we'll see if your predictions is true when this episode airs after the NASCAR season. Now, what was your thoughts on Ross's move at Martinsville, right there against the wall?
It was fantastic. I loved it. Yeah, guys, this is not the witness protection program. You are in NASCAR to get noticed. You're not there to fly above the radar. It was funny. It was amazing. It'll never happen again because of what they. But for him to do that, and it's so you think about these things, and again, for lack of a better term, and I know we're on a podcast, so we can push it a little bit. Man, you've got to be sitting on a pear to do something like that. And so obviously he was. He had a plan. He thought he might be able to do it. He did it. NASCAR did not look very highly on it in public. But when me and my wife went to Phoenix the following weekend, guess who had a barrier around the back of their hauler? It was the two Trackhouse trucks because there were so many people huddled around. When you go to the garage area, I mean, you've seen it before. You go to the garage area, there's just a transporter back there. And anybody really, if you have a garage pass, you can walk right up. It's not, you can't walk in the hauler. You can't walk in, but there were barriers and ropes and stanchions around the Trackhouse number one. And it was because of that. And again, it helped the team out tremendously. It helped Ross Chastain. He got on all the TV shows. He got all the coverage. It's not going to happen again, but that's what sports are about. That's what sports are about because, I joke about this. It's not the witness protection program. You are out there to be noticed. Michael Jordan wanted the ball in Game 7. Give me the ball. George Brett, Brooks Robinson, Cal Ripken, they want to be at bat with bases loaded in the bottom of the ninth. If you are a champion, you want that. Ross Chastain had an opportunity, wanted to run for the championship, and he finished second at Phoenix. So I loved it, and I don't think anything like that will happen again, but something similar will someday, and we'll be having the same conversation, I think.
Now, did you see the photo online? I think it was at Bristol. Somebody threw a cucumber on the track.
Yeah. So that's what we always joked about when they said the 1 year that the win was going to be encumbered. We always said, the win is cucumbered. It's cucumbered. But what restored my faith in social media, I get a little bit burned out with social media. It's it's very detrimental to journalism because people put stuff on their Twitter and their Facebook accounts, and it's absolute BS, and it gets people wound up. But that's the nature of our business these days. But what restored my faith in social media is that the day after someone started a Twitter account for the English cucumber that was in the So the English Cucumber has a Twitter account, which I'm all right with. And I follow the Cucumber. I follow the Cucumber right now, I'll admit it.
There you go. Now, you and Kenny Wattis has hosted Trackside Live. And what is it like working with Kenny Wattis?
Man, I loved Kenny Wallace from the minute I met him. And we had known each other for quite some time. And they said it was me. Well, the original group on the race day show was myself, Bill Engel, Derek Cope, and Steve Wade. The following year, it was myself, Chad Little, Barry Dodson, and Steve Wade. And then the year after that, when they were shuffling things around, and fortunately I was invited back, but it was let's see, it was going to be Barry, Barry Wade, and then Kenny Wallace. I said, Kenny Wallace is going to be with you. And I said, guys, this is great. I mean, this is fantastic. I love Kenny Wallace. But at that time, there was no Twitter, and there were only interview shows. Kenny had done RPM Tonight with John Kernan. He was on there quite a bit, but that was very structured. So I thought to myself at the time, I said, okay, you guys are going to give us Kenny Wallace, and it's not going to be scripted, and it's not going to be concise, and we're going to have time. And I got to tell you that the one thing, you hit it off with some people, and there's people that are in your lives that you work with, and you say, hey, let's work together. Then you go with, well, it was a lot different for me and Kenny. We spent a lot of time together away from the racetrack, and we laughed our rear ends off. There were several occasions where Kenny and myself and a couple other people were out and played. People thought we were just loaded drunk because we were laughing so hard. But we weren't. We were just laughing about it. And we worked so many hours together and spent so many hours together that we're always all right. And there was a couple times, there's not too many people who can just look you in the eye and say, stop doing that. It's really, really annoying. And Kenny used a different term for me one time. I was doing something. He said, stop doing that. That's annoying as blank. And I looked at him and I said, man, you know what? He's 100% right. That is annoying as blank. I'm doing something that's annoying as hell to one of my coworkers. And there's not too many people that can tell you that. There's just not too many people that you're that level of friend with that you can do that. And I will tell you this thing. And I hope I'm gonna tell Kenny because I want him to watch this when it airs, because it was really funny. We're in Phoenix, right? And so me and my wife and our daughter are driving into Phoenix, and this guy side swipes our car. And I mean, he knocks us out. I mean, he just Bubba Wallace, Kenny, Kyle Larson does, and knocks us out. And so we pull over, and we're trying to get, we're pulling into Phoenix on a Saturday or Friday. I think it was a Friday. And I was supposed to be in the booth with Kenny and Jeff Hammond to do Xfinity qualifying. And so we get sideswiped, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I'm way away, and I got to be that there's no one else to do my job, and I didn't want to come off as being an arrogant asshole or anything. But so this cop comes up and says, what's going on here? And I said, well, we got in this wreck. And I looked at her and I said, ma'am, I don't think I'm better than anybody else. I don't think my job's more important than anybody else, but there's just simply nobody else that can do my job today. And she goes, what are you talking about? And so I'm supposed to be in the booth for Fox Sports to broadcast the Xfinity qualifying. She goes, oh, well, when? I said, well, we have about a half hour. I got about a half hour to go. And so she goes, let me help you out. And so she goes over to the guy, obviously sideswiped. So they're trying to say it's my fault. And so this is super duper stressful situation. But so our production manager takes a golf cart and comes out to us. And she picks me up at the wreck. And my wife and our daughter stayed there at the wreck to finish everything up with the rental car and everything. And she goes, hey, you can go. I said, ma'am, thank you so much. And she goes, hey, you're honest about it, and cool about it. We'll take care of this. You go. So we drive this golf cart as fast as it can go. And I start now at the time, Phoenix didn't have an elevator to the broadcast booth. And it's about 100 degrees, and I'm an old fat guy. So I had to run up the grandstands. So I run up the grandstands. I'm sweating like Michael Vick at the Westminster Dog Show. And I get in the broadcast booth and I walk in there and I put the headset on. And when I put the headset on, the producer was saying 10, 9, 8. And I got this sweat pouring down. So we pop up on camera and we do the thing. Well, throughout the broadcast, Kenny Wallace is calling Kyle Larson's. He's putting an S on the end of the name. And so I don't know why. I really don't know what got into me. But after we were done, I was going to say, Kenny, the guy's damn name is Larson. It's not Larson's. And Kenny goes, nobody gives a damn about that but you. And I said, Kenny, we're in this thing. The one thing we got to do is get people's names right. And he goes, no one gives a about that but you. And we're yelling at each other. And it's so funny. We stopped yelling at each other for a second. And we looked at each other. And we start laughing, start hugging each other. we just got in an argument. We just got in a fight. We're laughing.
Now, what is John Roberts up to today? Do you still go to the races, or do you just stay at home?
Well, we occasionally these days get to go to the racetrack. I get to do Sirius XM, and I own a construction company. We build custom kitchens here in Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh,
so wow. If I'm not running my mouth, I'm building something.
Yeah. Now, can you tell us about the radio show, Trade and Paint?
Man, it's one of those things. Again, I'm so fortunate to be able to do this. It is an absolute blast. 2 hours a day with a really, really close personal friend for many years. Guys, again, it's funny. I hate to admit how many years I'd known Chocolate Myers and just known him as just the gentle giant. Love seeing him at the racetrack. Love talking to him. And so when my contract from Fox didn't get renewed, I needed something to do. So I called this gentleman by the name of Daniel Norwood, one of the best guys in the radio business, hands down. Awesome guy. I called him up and said, hey, dude, I got a lot of spare time. I said, man, do you guys ever on Sirius XM need a fill-in host, like vacation time or anything like that? I said, man, I'd be glad to help wherever I can. He goes, man, I'm really glad you called. I need a full-time person. And I said, to do what? And he goes, well, do you know Chocolate Myers? Do I know Chocolate Myers? And so he goes, I need a host to work this show with Chocolate Myers. So, dude, I said, I am 100% in if you're interested. And he goes, well, let me call Chocolate. And I said, he called Chocolate. And he said, hey, you know this guy? And Chocolate said, yes, I do. And fortunately, he gave me a rousing reference. So I got the call right back and started that. Shoot, guys, what has it been now? 4 years, I think. 4.
Wow.
We're in our 4th year together.
Now, and when does the show air?
It's for me, it's noon to 2 Central Time, 1 to 3 Eastern Time on Sirius XM Channel 90, and we're there Monday through Friday. And every once in a while, lately, when they have when people get busy and start doing some other things, I've been doing some weekend shows on Sirius XM, which I absolutely love because again, they say don't tell anybody, but they say, hey, can you work Sunday morning, and do 4 hours of NASCAR? I said, well, I'm sorry, but it's not work, but I'd be glad to do it. It's fun. It's a wonderful opportunity. And I always tell them, so if you want me to get on the air anytime, I may be in my pajamas, but I would be glad to do it.
Now, where can people follow you on the internet?
Okay, I'm at the Johnny TV on Twitter, at John Roberts TV on Instagram, and John Roberts on Facebook. And I try to, my wife is very, very good at making me do the right thing and tell people what's going on. I'm not as good, but we try to post what we're doing out there, and we try to post what's going on the radio show. to let the fans know. And again, at first I was not all about the social media, but man, when you hear from a race fan and they say thank you for what you do, and they say they like the program, man, there's nothing like it. It's fantastic. So anybody wants to send a message or a direct message or contact us, we'll always say hello. We'll always respond.
Absolutely. Now, John, I don't think you would come on the podcast, but before we go, in every episode, I would always ask my guests if they have a closing thought. So, do you got a closing thought?
Well, actually, I have a lot of closing thoughts, but I'll try to narrow it down to one. There's a few things going on in the world of NASCAR right now, and for the most part, they're all tremendously positive. I don't want to take anything away from past leadership of NASCAR, but guys, we have a gem in Steve Phelps as president. This is a caring guy who is passionate about turning things around, and he is not blowing smoke when he says the best days of NASCAR are ahead of us. When people try to say, well, there were some empty seats and there weren't that many people, and the ratings are down from this time 5 years ago. Well, guys, our society has changed. Our society has different ways of taking in media and different ways of perceiving sports. I find the exact same amount of passionate race fans out there. They are the best fans in all of sports. And believe me, after 36 years of the television business, I've seen every fan in every sport. And NASCAR is second to none in trying to please the fan. And guys, NASCAR, they're big boys and girls, big boys and girls. They can take the criticism. They take the criticism, but they try to turn it into something positive. And I love when people look at things in a positive way. There's a choice we have in life. We can be negative and try to shoot stuff down, or you can be positive and try to support it. There is much more positive going on in NASCAR right now than there is negative. Does the car need some tweaking? Yes. Does some of these venues need some tweaking? Yes. They're always trying to get better. But at least if you're on that that path, at least if you're on that way. And one of my favorite quotes ever was from the great Martin Luther King Jr. He said, if you cannot fly, then run. If you cannot run, then walk. If you cannot walk, then crawl, as long as you're moving forward. And I've always taken that to heart. And I think NASCAR and everybody involved in it right now is they may not be able to run, but they are walking. And if they're not able to walk, they're crawling, but everybody's pushing towards the same thing. And man, guys, we just have a lot to be thankful for. And I just want us to look at it that way.
There you go. Before I let you go, what channel is your show on Sirius XM?
Okay, Sirius XM Channel 90. And guys, for anybody who's watching right now that's asked about this, some of our Trackside Live programs are streamed right now. Some of them aren't. We're working towards next season. We are back next season. Thank you very much to do more Trackside Live shows. But what our goal is to make sure that they are all streamed. So if you can't make it to the racetrack, you can still get that old school feel on a streaming network on one of the racetrack's social media platforms. So we're trying hard to bring it to everybody. And so that's where you can find us. And again, I'm pretty easy to find and like to talk to anybody. You want to talk about NASCAR, I'm here for you.
Absolutely. John, I want to thank you once again for coming on here to talk about NASCAR and broadcasting.
Thank you very much, Jacob. I appreciate it, man. Keep up the good work, brother.
Oh yeah, thank you. But anyways, that's going to be it for this episode of Conversations with Jacob. Tune in next week for another interview. Until then, be safe, God bless, and we'll catch you in the next one.